Welcome to Nirronup, place of rin, ron and an abundance of diverse life. But it wasn't always this way, so what's changed to make this diversity and abundance happen? Before I go into those details, I'd like to recap a little bit of basic science from school. We all know that a plant uses sunshine, water and carbon dioxide to make sugar and oxygen. The general thought from here is that plants are eaten by animals and us for our food. But there's a whole other half to this story, and that goes on under the ground. Because something rather strange is happening. After going to all that trouble of making the sugars, the plant pumps quite a portion of them out into the soil. So what's going on here? To understand this, I need to introduce you to the 4 base groups of organisms that live in the soil. And to help me, I've got some footage of the organisms that I have seen down the microscope here at Nirronup. First of all, we have bacteria and fungi. The long strand in the middle of the screen is a strand of fungi, and the little white dots bobbling about are bacteria. These guys are the base of everything. We wouldn't be here. Nothing would be alive on this planet without the bacteria and fungi. Some of them fix atmospheric nitrogen into the soil. Some of them release minerals from the rocks and sand and things in the soil. So they're the base. And the sugars the plant is putting out of its roots attract these guys. Everyone loves a free feed, so they're going around the roots where there is a lot of sugar for food. Next along comes the nematodes and the protozoa. The nematodes and protozoa come along to eat the bacteria and fungi. And in the process of eating the bacteria and fungi, they excrete into the soil. Now, the roots of the plants don't have a mouth and teeth, so they are very specific about how they can take up the nutrient. And the products excreted by these 4 base organisms, just doing what they do around the roots of the plant, provide perfect plant food. So, here at Nirronup, we create lots of composts. And not wanting to do things the hard way, this is quite a simple process. During the year in the garden, I'm trimming and raking and weeding and all the sort of stuff that a gardener does. So I just put all those things in the wheelbarrow, and then I take them and set them out in a windrow, just a wheelbarrow at a time, and it accumulates. The weeds grow up through it, but that's fine because that'll all be part of the compost. Then we need to break this stuff up. So we've got this lovely machine called a flail mower. It's the orange thing on the back of the tractor. And a flail mower is a fairly specific thing because of the way the blades are. It does a wonderful job of chopping things up. Now this is the machine running, and it's really quite quick. The tractor just straddles the windrow, the flail mower goes along and breaks everything down. Now the idea of breaking the material down into little bits is that composting is a form of digestion. If you think of yourself putting a whole apple in your mouth, chewing it a little and swallowing it, it's not going to be very effective digestion. So for compost to work well, like us, it needs to be broken down before we try to digest it. Now we simply put the materials into a heap, making sure there is sufficient water. Because you've got to remember, this is life happening, and life requires generally 3 major things, and they are air, water and food. So we've packed the heap lightly so that there's plenty of air, we're adding the water, and the materials themselves are the food. Now that heap, within 24 to 36 hours, will get really hot, and the beauty of this is that it will kill weed seeds and any diseases and things in that hot part of the heap. So when we turn the heap, we make sure that we put the areas that have been cold on the outside into the middle. And you can see how hot it's been by the steam coming out in this little bit of video. Now, of course, then you can put the compost out as just a solid. You've got all this wonderful organic matter and plant nutrient and life, and it will structure your soils and feed your plants. But to make enough compost for a big area would be quite a big deal. So there is another little trick we use. Because compost is full of life, you can multiply the life without having to multiply the compost. And we do this by creating a liquid brew. And once again, we like to do things a simple way and not have to spend a lot of money on equipment. So here's the tank we brew it in. It's just an old hot water system that's been recycled and had a coupling put on the bottom, stainless steel. We then purchase this item, which blows air. And then we simply, remembering once again, you're dealing with life, we simply add water, food, I juice up a bit of plants, the complex sugars, and oxygen by pumping the air through. And this will all circulate around for 24 to 48 hours, brews quicker when it's warmer, and then we need to put it out on the garden. So I've used a very simple system for a smallish area. These are two 40-litre buckets on a trolley. So I bucket it into there, drag the trolley around, and then I simply spread it by dipping it out with a smaller bucket and flicking it with this brush. Now, that's fine for areas probably half an acre or more, and if you've got little fiddly areas in your garden, that's ideal. When you're ready to scale up, if this is working well for you, you can use tanks and pumps and things, but this is a way of getting started for very little expense. Now, this is some footage I took down the microscope when the brew was first brewing. So up in the upper left is when I first set the brew happening. The upper right is 3 hours later. The lower left is 3 hours after that, and then the lower right is 6 hours further on again. And as you can see, not only are we getting more life, we're getting more diverse life. So there's more things moving around. When you see movement under the microscope, that's life. So this is just to show that you're not putting out dirty water. You are putting out an abundance of life when you put out a liquid compost brew. So then we just simply flick it onto the garden. And the interesting thing that occurred here was my grapevine a couple of years ago, no matter how much brew I used on it, it would not come healthy. And I thought it was diseases, and then I thought a little closer. That year we'd had a really wet winter, and we're on a deep sandy soil. So what I guessed had happened was the trace elements had leached out the soil. So no matter how much compost brew I added, I wasn't going to fix the problem. I started adding trace elements, and within a couple of weeks the vine became healthy again. So this is the simple way that we add trace elements here at Nirronup, and the trace elements you're missing in your soils, if you're unlucky enough to be missing trace elements, will vary with where you are in the world, what your parent rock was, and a lot of other factors. So I needed to add back things like potassium, which is the K in red, calcium, which is the Ca, magnesium, the Mg, and boron, which is the B. I simply added back the potassium with wood ash because we use a wood fire for cooking and heating. I added back the calcium by making an eggshell and vinegar preparation from the eggs I was using to cook with. I added back the magnesium with Epsom salts. Now you can use that as a relaxing bath before you put it on your garden. And I added the boron with borax that I was using to soak my laundry first. And adding back these trace elements made a huge difference to my soils here. But the really wonderful thing was that I could just start to incorporate all this soil building into our daily lives. I didn't have to get a lot of equipment. I didn't have to go to a lot of effort. I just had to think differently about how we do things and view the materials that we already had very differently. Like if I want to make a bone broth, I do it in winter when I'm using the fire anyway. I make the broth and then I use the bones to be creating phosphorus for the ground. I just burn them and grind them. We reduce our fire hazard by using some of the wood for the fire. The brushwood, we break it down and we make heaps to grow things in. The small twigs and leaves get broken down and turned into mulch. So all these things are going on to serve various functions, and I really think there's a lot of potential in trying to create these sort of systems. So I got to thinking, this is a drone shot of where we live at Nirronup primarily, and you can see our food gardens, and we eat quite a percentage of our diet out of these gardens. I call them my feral food and medicine gardens. A lot of it now is perennialised. I'm not even planting some of this stuff. It's coming back from seed. It's a perennial plant, and the systems are just ramping up and replicating themselves. So that's the small area of land we needed out of this big area, because this is the whole of our property. It's 60 acres. It's 600 metres by 400 metres. And we have created a lot of wetlands on our property because water is so vital to life, and the longer you can hold the water in your landscape, the more the life will build up. So around the margins of this area, you can see where we live, and then you can see there is so much potential to replicate what we're doing in the small area we're on. So to me, a lot of the problems we have in our world as far as lack of food, pollution, food packaging, food miles, poor diet, can all be started to be resolved by simply getting people back in the landscapes and getting them back in tune with living in those landscapes to actually create more diversity and abundance just by living their life how they live. So what changed here at Nirronup? I no longer see things in the world like this. I see them like this. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your feedback and your questions.